Well, let's talk about the subprime crisis. Plummeting stocks on Wall Street have forced the mainstream media and economists to finally take notice of the housing bubble and the related dangers of the subprime lending industry. The New York Times laments what it calls the spiraling credit crisis. The Wall Street Journal points to the, quote, debt bomb. The Center for Economic and Policy Research says many journalists and economists have long ignored the facts. The housing market's been seriously overvalued for the past 10 years. Its collapse will cause a severe recession with grave consequences for millions of families. The subprime loan industry has emerged as a major and controversial player in the housing market. A recent study by the Center for Responsible Lending indicates subprime loans have led to 1 million American families losing their homes in the past decade. Danny, you've been writing extensively about this.
I've been writing about it. I also made the film In Debt We Trust, and we have a website, stopthesqueeze.org, to try to organize a campaign for debt relief in America. In other words, Bono was called for debt relief in Africa. We have to start fighting for debt relief in America. A moratorium on these foreclosures would be a first step, and also an investigation into the profiteers on Wall Street. We're talking about literally billions of dollars that have just been spent by the Federal Reserve and by central banks around the world to try to prop up the system. A lot of that is really benefiting the people who created the problem in the first place, the hedge funds, the financial analysts who went ahead with this effort. This subprime thing is really serious. I don't know if your viewers are all clear of it, or your listeners, but basically people who didn't have adequate credit to get homes were told, no problem, just pay us a little bit more and we will give you the mortgage. Then they took the mortgage, they resold the mortgage back into Wall Street, into what are called securitization trusts. These trusts then not only financed more acquisitions and buyouts and the like, but they also basically made incredible amounts of money for these people. So we're now facing a situation. The New York Times, I love this phrase, just the other day, talked about a moral hazard, meaning that the risk takers who brought on this panic would feel bailed out again. And they are being bailed out again. And the problem is the opposition is not saying much about it. The Democrats are not talking about it. Activists are ignoring it, maybe because economics is the dismal science, but we have been getting a lot of response to our film In Debt We Trust and to this issue because it's an issue that brings together people across the partisan lines, across class lines, across racial lines. It could be the issue that could lead to a fight for economic justice in this country.
You talk about the hedge funds, for example, and how they're connected to this. Do you think that it's not a major issue in the presidential race because the very moneyed class that these politicians are both coming from, some of them, but also appealing to for money, are those that are a part of this?
We saw this, and I document this in my film In Debt We Trust, about the bankruptcy reform bill, where tremendous amounts of money were spent on lobbyists, $151 million to try to get this, quote, reform passed, and Democrats supported it as well as Republicans. So it wasn't just, you know, the big bad Bushies here, but it was sort of the Democrats as well who were implicated, and part of the reason is because their campaign donors include these very wealthy companies and financial institutions and real estate developers. So it's very much a part of the deeper corruption of our financial and economic system.
How do you think it has to be dealt with right now?
Well, it has to be dealt with. First of all, we have to become more aware of it and put this issue more on our agenda. I mean, the military has just tried to spur re-enlistments to Iraq by saying, we'll help you pay off your debts. If you have college loans, we'll help you pay them off. So debt is central and part of that crisis as well. So what we need to do, it seems to me, is A, inform ourselves. Screenings of In Debt We Trust might help in that process. Secondly, we need to push for regulation. We need an investigation. We need to have prosecution of these big corporate guys who have been making so much money off the misery of so many Americans, and to try to put an end to these processes. So when you have to stop talking about subprime, you have to start talking about subcrime, which is an article that I wrote on MediaChannel.org the other day, and it's gotten a tremendous response. We have to criminalize these practices, not just nod at them and bail out the people who have put us in this situation.
Danny, I want to end on an entirely different issue, but you take on issues of the world every day in your blog. The rock band Pearl Jam has accused AT&T of censorship after the company removed comments the band made about President Bush during a recent concert that AT&T aired in an online webcast. During the concert, the band's singer, Eddie Vedder, said, "George Bush, leave this world alone, and George Bush, find yourself another home." For viewers watching the concert via AT&T, the remarks were edited out. This is an uncensored clip of the concert.
George Bush, leave this world alone. George Bush, leave this world alone. George Bush, find yourself another home.
That was the unedited version.
So great. And, you know, the thing about this is, of course, AT&T is saying, no, it was one of our contractors that did this in an unauthorized way. We're working with the band to get the song out online. You know, they're basically not boasting that they did it. They're basically trying to, you know, cover up the fact that they were involved or implicated in it. But, you know, this is only part of a much deeper problem. I spent 10 years in rock and roll radio, and, you know, I was just back up in Boston. WBCN was the station I worked for, and the radio there is terrible. It's all controlled by big corporate media outlets. There's very little of the diversity on the airwaves that we really need. So this is a problem, and it's a serious one of censorship. But the real censorship seems to be the manipulation by big telecom companies and radio companies and media companies, basically, of our airwaves. So it comes back to that once again. It's
interesting. A reader to the emailed the Chicago Sun-Times saying AT&T's Blue Room webcast had also silenced comments during two performances, I may be pronouncing this wrong, at the Bonnaroo Festival in Tennessee last June, cutting remarks by the John Butler Trio, bemoaning the lack of federal response to Hurricane Katrina, and comments about Bush and the war in Iraq by singer Wayne Coyne of the Flaming Lips. The article from the Chicago Sun-Times saying it's not the first time AT&T has done these edits. AT&T did confirm that other unspecified political comments have been cut from its webcast.
Nor will it be the last time unless we take on this issue and begin to speak up for democracy on the airwaves, not just Democracy Now!, but broader, more diversity on the airwaves, and more support for artists who are speaking out on important issues. And, you know, this just brings that issue back in front of our faces again.
How does net neutrality tie into this?
The idea here
is
the idea, the term is not a great term, but it's basically a free internet, which is not controlled by the big developers and big companies that run it now. And in fact, you know, this has been a fight to not get good content on the air, but also to stop people from suppressing it and censoring it. One positive note, for me anyway, was that of all people, AOL came to us and said they want to run our film WMD, Weapons of Mass Deception, and In Debt We Trust. And I think they are only doing that because there's such a demand for uncensored information online and on the airwaves.
Could you foresee a time where the kind of information people put up, you just can't hear it or see it? I mean, it's just blocked on the internet?
It's blocked, but it's also tough, as you know, to keep funding independent media, to keep, you know, websites like MediaChannel.org alive, to try to keep the voices of dissent and the voices of criticism of our media system in front of people's faces. And it's harder and harder to do that, especially with a big political campaign sucking up all the progressive money into the coffers of these candidates.
And then into the coffers of the big media conglomerates who are paying for the ad time
there
for.
You go.
Well, Danny Schechter, I want to thank you for being with us. Veteran journalist, his latest film, In Debt We Trust, America Before the Bubble Burst. His blog, newsdissector.org. This is Democracy Now!, which